Today on CityCast Boise. Around town, it feels like everyone knows someone who's recently gotten laid off, but Idaho's unemployment rate is still one of the lowest in the country. So we're digging into explanations for the disconnect and where to find a good local job. It's Tuesday, September 30th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Our executive producer, Frankie Barnhill, is joining me to break down what's happening in the Boise job market. Thanks for being here, Frankie.
Yeah, happy to do this. Disclaimer, I'm not an economist, but I did talk to one, and I spent a lot of time looking at some data that I think is kind of interesting. So, yeah.
Well, lately, we've been hearing more about people who are struggling to find work in the Treasure Valley. So what do the unemployment numbers actually look like right now?
Yeah, as far as unemployment goes, Idaho as a whole has actually a pretty low unemployment rate, and that's been consistent at 3.7% with the latest data in August. And then to put that in context, it's also lower than the national rate, which is 4.3%. So pretty low unemployment, really, across the state, and also in Boise. Boise mirrors that Idaho rate. So, yeah, I mean, the unemployment rate's actually pretty good.
And has that been steady for us? Like, is that similar to what the unemployment rate was in 2024, 2023?
Yeah, pretty much. Basically, since the recovery post-COVID, when, of course, the unemployment rate skyrocketed across the country and in Idaho. Once people started getting back to work, it's actually stayed pretty consistently low overall, which on the one hand, you're like, okay, well, that's great. But then you hear these stories of people who are, struggling to find work or struggling to find better work, and, don't want to discount those experiences of what the challenge might look like.
And how are these state unemployment rates calculated? Like, how do they quantify, like, these people qualify as unemployed?
First, you need to identify who's in the labor force or who's employed, both employed individuals and unemployed individuals. And when we're talking about unemployed, we're not talking about like retirees. It has to be people who are actively seeking work. You're not including, college students or anyone who's younger and wouldn't be looking for work right now. So it is, a pretty accurate look at who is actively looking right now and who is in need of a job. And you're dividing that by the number of unemployed workers by the total labor force. It's a little quick calculation, and that's how the number's done. And of course, the Idaho Department of Labor, they put out these numbers every month. They're monitoring, what like sectors are doing and how things are changing over time. But yeah, this number's been fairly steady. And of course, when I spoke with a Department of Labor economist with Idaho, they did say that, the economy is not growing as fast as it was a couple years ago. That is true. So if people are kind of looking over their shoulders and going, it doesn't really feel as hot as it did a couple years ago, again, kind of in that post-COVID recovery period where it was just like, everybody who wants a job, anybody wants a job, and there's also better jobs to be had at that time. That has changed. However, I will say, people are getting paid more. Payroll numbers, like the sheer number of people on payrolls, is higher than it was even a couple years ago. And wages are also growing. We can get more into how good that actually looks when it comes down to it later on. But yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that is so strange is technically we're not in a recession.
Right.
But it sure feels like you said, vibes. It's feeling like recession vibes. It's feeling kind of, these once in a lifetime events that have happened so many times for us in the past, couple of decades. So we're not technically in a recession, but the job market does feel tough. Why does it feel rough right now?
Yeah, it does feel just kind of sticky and weird and hard in some ways. And for some people, like fully, they just can't find work that's either fulfilling or pays them well enough to pay their bills, or just can't find work at all. I mean, I think that overall, as you said, vibes, it feels like this whole year we've kind of been like, okay, is a recession about to happen or are things about to improve? Is a recession about to happen or are things about to improve? And because these numbers overall have kind of stayed steady, we've just kind of been in this place for a while. Interest rates have mostly remained high, which of course affects people's wallets, although they did come down recently a little bit by the Fed. But yeah, people read headlines about tariffs, and as you said, we've had conversations with people, business owners who've experienced, had to cut back or at least not expand as much as they wanted to. So yeah, we're not hearing mass layoffs, which would be recession, yikes. But we're also not hearing like everybody's got a job they love. It pays well. Everybody's got a house they want. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of where we are right now. It's a kind of a funky time.
Well, and when we're talking about jobs, what qualifies for a good job in Boise now? How are you defining it, or how, when you looked into it, how is that being defined, and what does that really mean for people?
Yeah, and I'd love your thoughts too. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think let's start with what do we think? What do we feel like makes a good job? I mean, of course, you want work-life balance. So we're, talking about no more than 40 hours a week. You want to have steady schedules. You want to have obviously solid pay, and we can get more into what that could look like. And of course, benefits. You want health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm kind of thinking about like the jobs that have steadiness, have also some trajectory for growth that you can move up eventually if you'd like to. You can expand your career. And I would say, when we actually look at the hard numbers, salary is probably the main thing to look at, of course. And with Boise's, of course, rising cost of living, that's where it gets a little tricky. So, an economist at the Department of Labor told me that, and this is standard across the country, the kind of benchmark that all economists look to, that the Fed talks about for housing specifically, is you want to, your house should be less than 30% or less of your household income. So whatever you're paying, especially if you're trying to buy, definitely not more than 30%. That includes mortgage, interest rate, insurance, and all of that. The Atlanta Federal Reserve actually has this really interesting affordability tracker that looks at all the different metros. And so I looked at the Boise metro, and basically, yeah, it is unaffordable. Like, how many times have we said this, on the podcast, Lindsay? And the data absolutely backs that up. So you need to basically, if you're going to be buying a median priced home in Boise and you have the median income in Boise, you're paying 50% of your income is going to that house.
Okay, what are they saying is the median income in Boise right now?
Yeah, great question. So the Atlanta Fed is saying that the median household income in Boise as of July is about $84,000, and the median home price is about $496,000. So that's where that 51% of a person's income is going to their housing. So all that to be said, to answer your question, I mean, what do you think makes for a good job in Boise? Like, what are you looking for? What are your, people in your life looking for? Like, what do you think at this stage in your life makes for a good job?
I mean, definitely the wage, I would say, is the number one factor, because if you can't afford
Yeah,
housing, food, it doesn't matter. You could have a great work-life balance, but if without work-life balance, you can't afford a place to live,
exactly.
you can't afford food, like,
Yep.
that all slides down. So yeah, definitely I'd say something where you can afford to live comfortably, not, necessarily extravagantly, but I think if you're working a good job, you should be able to afford to buy a home. I think that, I know that's subjective, but I think it
Sure.
should mean good job. You can afford to buy a home if that's something you're interested in doing. I know that's not what everyone wants to do. But then, yeah, you're able to comfortably afford a vehicle, or you're just these like really standard things, your food, just like,
Yeah.
if you're working a good job, I feel like it should be like, yep, I'm working, and then on the weekends I can hit up a movie, walk the green belt, maybe every
Go get
once
a
in a while.
nice coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, just
yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
really, I don't know, the millennial extravagances, you should be able to
Right.
afford those.
Oh, yeah, I know. And that's what's so interesting is, thinking about like, I'm just thinking about middle class. And Boise has been, in the past been a city, just like such a middle class city. And It still is, but it does feel like it's a little bit more out of reach than it used to be. And the numbers, at least when it comes to affordability, does back that up. But then the question is, again, where are the jobs? What kind of
Yeah.
jobs are they? What are the wages? And yeah, I mean, people should be able to go on vacation, a couple times a year, whatever, go visit family, do really normal things. And it is a complicated picture right now, depending on what your job is.
There have been some recent headlines about wages increasing in Idaho, but with inflation still high, I know it's gone down a little bit, but it's still high.
Yeah.
And the cost of everything is climbing. I mean, I saw this on Reddit recently. I experienced it. I was like, okay, I'm having the same experience. The coffee that I get at Costco increased by $6 a bag in 1 month. And so I was like, okay, I have to find another option that's not in my budget anymore. So, do these increases feel real for workers in Boise, or is it just,
Right.
your wages went up a little bit, but everything else went up a little bit too. So you're right where you were, or even a little underwater now.
Yeah. I think it's going to be subjective, but in my group chats with friends, I don't think anyone's feeling like, ooh, look at this wage growth. I'm just like living so lavishly now all of a sudden. It does seem as though, if anything, because the housing prices, as we know, skyrocketed so much in 2020, and that trickled down into everything, that, if anything, this wage growth that actually, taken in the context of the rest of the country, apparently Idaho is number one for growth in income change. But it's a percentage that, probably doesn't reflect what everybody's paying extra for, mostly housing being the number one thing. I think that the coffee actually is an interesting example. I wonder how much, if tariffs are affecting that or anything like, I have no idea, but we did know that coffee might be one of those products that tariffs would affect. So, everything from, $6 more a month or, every 2 weeks for your bag of coffee, however much you use, to the affordability index, going back to, let's see, it was 2018 was the last time technically that Boise's housing market was affordable for someone who was making the median wage, in the city. So it's been a long time since people were making enough money to really afford to buy a home and to live in the city that they work in and that they love.
Yeah. And when we, kind of close in on Boise or the Treasure Valley, what industries are employing, the majority of people or are major employers in this area? And how do those jobs stack up pay wise, or when we're
Yeah.
quantifying them as quote unquote good?
Yeah, this is so fascinating. Okay, so the number one, this is kind of a sector. I'm going to go by sectors. The number one sector, as far as just sheer number of people employed, the category is office and administrative support occupations. Okay. Now there's a range. I took average wages. So on the bottom end, on the average wage for someone who's, probably essentially an admin support person, $46,000. Now that's way below, again, what you would need to make, way below the median, if you're a family of one. And then, however, there are opportunities like I saw within that same big category. If you're a supervisor for a bunch of other people, you're probably making more like $60,000. So that's one industry. Fascinating that has the most people, I think, by sheer numbers. Another sector that has a lot of people employed in the Treasure Valley, transportation and material moving occupations is what it's called. And that also kind of similar depending on your experience. And of course, if you're managing folks, can be more. Now, those jobs also oftentimes, you don't necessarily need a 4-year degree. So maybe you're not paying student loans to be in those roles. It depends. You probably wouldn't be surprised, Lindsay, to hear that food service is also really high as far as
Yep.
sheer number of people, right?
People got staff all those In-N-Outs coming to town.
Right. Let alone all of the wonderful local spots that we love too. But yeah, I mean, that's, I certainly know plenty of people who've worked in that industry or are in it, or maybe were in it for longer than they wanted to be, given what other options they had. And then there's like sales. And sales is a sector in Boise that has both growth potential and high wage potential too. Like, definitely some six-figure options within that sector. And then somewhere a little bit down further, but still very high in terms of sheer numbers that we'll talk about more, I'm sure. Healthcare. You probably
Oh,
wouldn't be
yeah.
surprised to hear that healthcare is pretty high in the Boise market.
I know that between the two hospitals, they always come up as one of the top employers in the city and in the
Exactly.
state. So, not surprising. Some of those were surprising, but healthcare, definitely not. So, looking at these jobs, looking at our area, and we mentioned that growth has stalled or not exactly stagnant, but it's not a hot market anymore. It's just kind of leveled off a little bit. Where are we seeing the biggest job growth? Or is there anywhere where we can significantly see job growth? And are there areas that we can expect more growth?
And I think, yeah, even the term hot market, it's so interesting because if you compare to other states, certainly hotter than other states that are seeing more stagnation. But yes, it's not as much as it was a couple years ago. Okay, we already said it, healthcare. So the number one specific job for growth potential in Idaho, nurse practitioners. According to the Department of Labor, this is actually from 2023 stats, but probably still apply. 66% growth potential as nurse practitioners. Number three, I'm going to skip down a couple because I wanted to get to another healthcare role because there is a theme here. Physician assistants, 46% growth potential there. As someone who is a nurse, Lindsay, I'm just kind of curious, like, you went into nursing. We know that this is an area where there's certainly a lot of people in the baby boomer generation who live in the Treasure Valley who are probably going to need more and more people like physician's assistants and doctors and nurses to treat them. Does that at all surprise you, I guess, that this would be a place for major growth potential?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. There's already there's already significant shortages in healthcare,
Yeah.
and there are rising significant shortages of physicians, of doctors, and that is expected to just, continue and continue to be a bigger and bigger problem. And with that lack of doctors, a way that people are trying to fill that gap is with nurse practitioners and physicians assistants. And so that's a way
Yeah.
to try to bridge that gap. If you don't have enough doctors, you have physicians assistants and nurse practitioners who can work under physicians and take care of some of those other situations so doctors can focus on more specialized work or things like that. So I am not surprised at all. I think probably from my graduating class of nurses, I think probably at least a third to half have started or have finished nurse practitioner school. So that's where a lot of nurses are going.
Yeah, I mean, healthcare definitely is an area for growth in the Treasure Valley, which mimics nationally. But we know that, like I said, besides the baby boomer generation, the Treasure Valley has become a really attractive place for retirees to move, and those folks are, going to have more healthcare needs than they have in previous stages of their life.
Looking across this whole landscape, Frankie, what stands out to you about where Boiseans are working now? Or where do you think the best opportunities for the future will be looking at all of this data?
Oh, if only I could have figured that out. That is like the literally $1 million question. One thought that I had that I was kind of curious to look into was construction and the trades in general. And of course, growth has been the story of Boise for many years now. And that area certainly has growth potential. There are a number of people employed in those roles in construction in particular, thinking about technical jobs like carpenters have they're the number 6 position for potential for growth. Like 43% growth is what they're projecting right now. And the average wage is like $50,000 a year. Now, that does take obviously some training. Perhaps it doesn't require a 4-year degree. So again, if you're not paying student loans, maybe you can pencil that out. But yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about like, what is the story of Boise right now? It's growth. And so who's gonna build these homes? Who's expanding Micron, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely that sector is interesting to me, especially given that you may or may not, have student loans to pay if you're going to do any of those roles. And then also government jobs. We already mentioned the federal job cuts, but Boise being the capital city also has a lot of government jobs. And government jobs have been a place where people think of as quote unquote good jobs in the past when we're thinking about stability.
Yeah.
Perhaps the pay isn't the highest, but you know what it is? You've got maybe great health benefits, retirement or pension. But in the Trump administration, the second Trump administration era, that's not necessarily the case anymore as far as stability. And we did see a retraction of what the federal Department of Labor just qualifies as government jobs. So I'm not sure if they're federal or state. We did see almost a 2.7% reduction in that sector year over year. So we have seen a slightly reduced government workforce in Boise.
Frankie, I'm curious, are people sticking with the current jobs they have? Are they, loyal to their employer, sticking with their job, or are they with this job market taking chances and saying like, hey, I've got to apply for something new. I've got to, you can't just stay where you're at. You've got to apply for new things to get the wage increases to keep up with inflation and everything. Is that what we're seeing? Or are people, doing the old school, stick with the job, it's a good job, and keep it?
Yeah, I think stick with it and quit and don't quit is the answer right now, as certainly as opposed to a couple years ago, as we talked about when the recession ended, or when the COVID, the worst of the pandemic ended and people were returning to work. There were just like all kinds of jobs available. There was the whole that great resignation trend where people were quitting jobs that they didn't like or weren't working for them and finding something better, whether it was better pay or better opportunities. That's not happening anymore. The economist I spoke with said that it's called voluntary quits. Voluntary quits are down 20% from the peak a couple of years ago. So yeah, people are sticking with it. Whether or not they're happy in what they're doing, they are sticking with it. And I think that reflects this uncertainty and the question of, well, if I quit, is there something better for me out there? Or is this probably as good as it's going to be right now? Which of course means that, there aren't as many opportunities for people who are new to the market and are trying to participate.
Yeah. I definitely want to pivot a little bit and talk about new grads, because that's a group, we had an episode on CityCast Boise about that this year. It is something I keep hearing again and again, that the college new grads are just really struggling to get a foot in this market. Compared to previous years, is 2025, looking at the data, tougher for new grads? Like, how are they doing in this job market?
Yeah, it does seem like nationally that is the case, and it's probably happening in Idaho to one degree or another. Now, of course, I certainly, when I graduated at the height of the Great Recession in 2009, it was so much fun, Lindsay. I was employed. I wasn't employed doing what I wanted to do, so I didn't show up in those unemployment numbers. I was working as a barista and a nanny and doing all these different things because I couldn't get a job as a full-time journalist. So that's interesting, because it could mean that there are some people, some young folks who are trying to get into, the job that they went to college for. And because people are mostly, the folks who are already in the job market are pretty much staying pat, unless companies are adding new roles, brand new jobs and entry level ones. Yeah, they might be struggling, and they might be staying in that barista role longer than they want to. And that's where I think we see this kind of mismatch in what we're seeing in the numbers, or we just don't know fully. That's where the anecdotal stories are interesting to hear from people.
Frankie, thank you so much for looking into this and then breaking it down for us.
Yeah, happy to do it.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure and tell your friends about the show. We'll be back tomorrow morning with our guide to October. Catch you then.